Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of our robotic design series. In the previous video we talked about some concepts related to robotic design such as implied function, evolutionary inspiration, and the benefit of having a library of fundamental mechanical joints that would be useful for rapidly concepting ideas through the use of informed kit bashing. In this video, we're going to start off our modeling by creating a robotic arm with a lot of cool factor, where we will intentionally neglect a good sense of functionality, meaning that we won't be able to comfortably pose or animate it. We will leave mechanical clues in the object that give it a sense of implied functionality, which is where we leave hints to the viewer that give the illusion that serious consideration has gone into the possible motion of the object. This is going to be shown in a time-lapse commentary format because there's just over 3 hours of footage and I'm not going to make you sit through all of that. We'll start off by having a look at the end result and I'll explain what I'm going for. So I collected a few resources to serve as an inspiration. I'm not copying any one of these in particular, rather just taking bits and pieces from each and coming up with something that hopefully looks interesting. You can see that I'm going for something that's more sleek than a traditional industrial robot arm, something that's more representative of the form of a human arm. The colour and shape of these musculature pieces I quite like in particular, as well as the couplings of the other arm. But to juxtapose this sleekness, I wanted to make it a bit messy and chaotic in some places, with some wires connecting important areas, as if the arm has been hastily thrown together by some technophile in a cyberpunk universe. Having elements connecting externally would be pretty much the opposite of the clean design we'll be doing in the next video, because most of the wiring in that one would be self-contained, except for external power. Now at the time I started recording, I had already created the upper curved objects here, because I always make the mistake of only recording once I pass the initial threshold of confidence, which usually happens after placing about 5 objects or so. The curved surfaces are cubes with a subdivision surface modifier that have been extruded, bent, and then merged in the center with a mirror modifier. To make them sharper at the edges, extra edge loops were added. These objects will later be duplicated and reformed elsewhere on the arm, as you'll see in the footage. We jump into it as I'm starting to place down the ball joint. What you'll notice is that I'm putting the ball joint down before I even know how it will connect to the top. And that's really because I'm just not that bothered about how it will actually fit together. Pieces like the ball joint are more focal points for implied functionality, as previously mentioned, where their sole purpose is to trick people into thinking that there's some real function to them. What I'm doing here is taking one of the mirrored musculature pieces from the upper section and thinking about ways I can surround and enclose the ball joint. The lower arm will need some metal framing, so I figure why not just take a piece of the framing from above and use it to scaffold the lower section. This will require some modifications to bring the shape a bit inwards and make it a little bit more streamlined. I try and conform the muscular structure to the scaffolding so that it looks like they are in some way holding each other together. It will be a continual process of shifting vertices around and letting the subdivision surface modifier do its job to flesh out the space in between. I duplicate the muscle and add an extra layer which we will be able to see through the gap in the metallic scaffolding. The tops of the muscle pieces are kept in close proximity to the ball joint so that it looks like they are connected from the outside. I'm playing around with the lighting and the materials this early on because I know that I'm going to have to visually separate the metal from the muscle structures. They share similar surfaces, so without material variation, they will be somewhat difficult to differentiate. Actually, one of the motivations for this series in the first place was because I was planning on doing one on procedural materials in Blender, but I needed some interesting objects to work with, so I thought why not make some robotics to use, and in the end we've ended up with this series. Now I'm trying to bridge the gap between the upper and lower arm section by extending a segment of frame between them. Having a solid piece of metal connecting them would not allow the arm to bend, but I'm not really worried about that since we're intentionally disregarding function for form. Later on, I will put some objects on this connecting piece to imply some possible movement anyway. I like to use proportional editing at times when moving vertices that are controlling a subdivision surface modifier. Using the 3D cursor is useful for acting as a pivot point to help rotate objects around a point of interest, which in this case is the ball joint. It also acts as a variable in 3D space that we can then copy to something else, such as the origin of another object. This will be quite useful in the next video when getting the center of axes correct for the more functional robot arm. Just to make the variety of shapes more interesting, I'm creating some base objects that will emerge from under the muscle strips. These will act like ports that we will use to connect cables between the upper and lower sections of the arm. I'll create the cabling with Bezier curves. Keeping them as curves the whole way through rather than turning them into meshes will mean that we can keep control over the resolution of the geometry. Again, the mirror modifier is handy, and I duplicate the ports to create a place that the wiring can connect to at the top, tucking them away in between the metal framing and the muscle pieces. So now that we've got a decent shape for the arm going, I decide to start building the transition piece for the bottom of the arm where an end effector can be connected. Not knowing precisely what kind of details I want to add to the surface of the transition, I add some loop cuts and start to think of ways to make it look like it's connected to the scaffolding and muscle pieces. This mostly includes dragging the ends of the objects down, and in the case of the scaffolding, having it overlap the transition piece to look like it's clamping on. Now I really want to start applying materials because it's getting to the point where there are enough objects on the screen for it to be difficult to differentiate. I like the red color for the muscle content in the reference imagery, so I'm going to go with that. For the cabling, a reflective non-metallic black that looks kind of plastic would be cool. After taking an overall look at the model, I'm thinking that I need to find a way to make the lower arm and transition piece really sit together. The main problem with it at the moment is that the muscle strips are not really connected to it in any significant way, so in the spirit of hiding things rather than functionally piecing them together, I think that putting some extra plating around the connecting area might help to sell the illusion. At this point I switch over to using a Maccap to view the object because it helps to visualize the curvature of the surfaces, especially when there's a significant variety of objects interacting with each other in a condensed area. So at this point I've been looking at the metal strips that connect the upper and lower arm, knowing that they look like they prevent any kind of bending. So I'm going to put some cylindrical forms around them that could be interpreted as some kind of pneumatic joint. What I'm thinking here is that the arm could do with a bit more substance inside of it, so I'm thinking of ways to put another kind of stretchy synthetic structure on the inside, and then following that I'll extend pieces of the muscle strips from the lower arm to the upper. I want more cabling to make it a bit more chaotic, so I'll duplicate the wiring pieces from earlier and adjust them to fit a bit further under the arm. So what's going on here is that I've decided that the arm needs a larger mechanical form to connect the upper and lower sections. This will serve as the primary piece for implied functionality, as it will likely be the first thing the viewer looks at when observing the underside of the arm. Now I want to give more detail to the transition piece at the bottom of the lower arm, thinking of things that I can connect to it. One thing that I realized quite quickly is that the transition piece is at an angle due to the way that the arm has been built so far, which isn't a huge problem, but it is quite annoying when improvising new shapes. So what I do is decide that I need to level out the base, which would include having to change the position of vertices for the muscle strips and scaffolding that connect to the transition. What I'm doing here is improvising a basic structure for some kind of gripper. I don't really have a reference to work from, so what I'm thinking to start with is just a metal bar with some grooves across it that the different pads of the gripper can move across. I will end up revisiting the gripper later on to make it better. At this point, I'm just making some adjustments to other parts of the arm and adding little details where I think they might be necessary. I like the idea of having transition pieces at the beginning and end of the arm, plus in one of the reference images there was a nice coupling piece that I want to take some inspiration from. It gives the design a sense of modularity. Since we're keeping a certain amount of the wiring on the outside of the arm, I want to find a way to connect the gripper to the rest of the arm electronically. Nothing too detailed, it doesn't have to look real on close inspection. The wires don't really have anywhere to go on the arm to start with, so I'll just suspend the ends in space where I think they should roughly go, and then start to build a little box on the back of the lower arm where the ports for the wires should go. Now I'm just adding some extra little bits of detail to fill in some underarm space, like a little power pack or something with an obscure purpose. Since we're doing form over function, this would be the sort of time to use a kit bash object for detailing, but I'm going to manually model everything about these arms for demonstration purposes. I'll extrude the sides of the upper transition piece to make it look more like it can be modularly coupled to another smaller piece, and then once I've done that, I'll create another transition object that will float in space just to demonstrate how the pieces might fit together. Keeping parts like this looking modular can help to visualize how they could be snapped onto any other surface. After that, I come back to the gripper and start to make it into something more cool. The gripper handles are too simple for me, so I want to make them into something that has more interesting angles and will look better with the rest of the arm from a distance. I like the shape of it a lot more because it's a lot more complementary to the rest of the arm. The larger scale of the gripper handles is also more appropriate. From here I proceed to look around the arm and add some extra details here and there, starting with filling the wiring port box on the back of the lower arm with some extra geometry, as well as adding a bit more color and material variety to specific parts of the object. So at this point of looking around the arm for a while, I think sod it, let's just put a gun in the gripper and make it some kind of turreted robot arm. Again, this is all for visual effect, it's completely unrealistic, so we might as well keep pushing that aspect while we're here before moving over to the more functional robot arm. I've also sped up the time lapse from this point on because there was a lot of iterative improvisation with entire sections being replaced. I do skip ahead just a tiny bit here because not everything was recorded, but the only real changes made were to the end of the gun barrels, which was still a work in progress. What I'm doing now is playing around with the lighting because I know I'm reaching the end of what I wanted to do with the arm. There are still some little changes I want to make. For example, I don't like the end of the gun barrels, so I'll go ahead and change that once I'm done with the lighting. And here we go, this is what we've ended up with. A robot arm that puts form above function, meaning it's supposed to look cool rather than function well. In the next video we will do the opposite and come up with a much cleaner design. So thank you for watching, I hope you found it interesting. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and ring the bell, and I'll see you in part 3.